Hello and welcome to this presentation, Positive about Bilingualism and Cultural Diversity. My name is Dr. Sean Pert and I'm an advisor in bilingualism for RCSLT.
Hello, my name's Sunita and I am also an advisor for RCSLT in bilingualism too.
So who are we here to serve? So all people with SLCN, feeding and swallowing disorders, their families and carers. So we're very used to removing all the barriers, all the communication barriers to effective advice, assessment and delivery of care. But for more diverse clients, this involves us adapting in a professional manner. So I think, Sunita, because we've been doing this for many years, we kind of take it for granted that we can just kind of say things like, tell me a bit more about that. We kind of change the structure of our sessions, don't we? Would you like to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, and I think definitely because we want to find out quite a lot about the family, their background, their languages, their culture, and really get some transparency into how they live and use languages. So it's not afraid to ask lots of different questions to really kind of form that relationship about how you're going to support them and key factors that we're going to use in the journey across speech and language therapy intervention.
Great, thank you very much, Sunita. I think the other things that we'll be talking about in the presentation today as well are kind of using your privilege as a professional to kind of say, well, you know, we know that you might find what we're asking you to do a little bit odd because you're not used to speech and language therapy assessment. I mean, I always say most people don't know what we do, but if you're from a different cultural background, I think it's even more puzzling, don't you think?
Definitely, especially when they see speech and language therapist and we come in to work on swallowing. So yes, definitely.
Yeah. So let's think about the UK situation. I quite like this pie chart because when you hear it in the media that the UK population is being swamped with people from different cultures, I go, really look at the size of that pie. This is really, you know, not the case. There are significant populations from different ethnic backgrounds, and they make very important contributions to British society. But it's certainly not true that this is a huge percentage of the population. Don't you find that, Sunita?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a misconception. I think, you know, looking at that pie chart, it really opens your eyes to see what percentages we are actually talking about when it comes to the languages kind of being served by our services.
Yeah. And I also think that we'll come on to this shortly, but ethnicity does not automatically mean that someone will speak a different language. And I think, you know, I personally know lots of people who are maybe culturally diverse, but, you know, they'll say things, a lot of my students will say, well, you know, my mum and my gran speak this language, but I don't really speak any of this at all.
Definitely.
And that still means that you may have encountered prejudice because of racism and maybe a bit wary of some healthcare settings, don't you think?
Yeah, and I think parents, if they don't have the knowledge of what we are and who we're serving, it can be quite daunting, especially when you're in a multidisciplinary setting and there's lots of different professionals involved and thinking you're another person that's come, who are you, what are you here to kind of help with? And it's getting that message across of who we actually are and what we're actually here to do.
Absolutely. So the census really asked the wrong question, which is slightly frustrating, really, because it said, which is your main language? Well, for most people, obviously living in England and Wales, people tend to speak English or Welsh. So 92% of the population speak one of those two languages. And then we've got Polish, Punjabi and Urdu. But we were saying just before we started this session, weren't we, that really hides the complexity and the richness of diversity that is in these communities.
Definitely, because we've got so many different languages, and accounting for dialects too. You know, even though I speak Gujarati myself, the dialect that my in-laws speak is very different. So certain words that I might be using can be very foreign for them because it's mixed in with some Swahili. So it's so dependent on each individual family that even though they might be a Gujarati speaker, their languages might change because of the exposure that the parents have used in the past, and different vocabulary can be switched in. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sunita. I think it's really important to kind of say each family is unique, really, in their language experience. And I think as well, you use that word dialect. I mean, I know people say to me, "Oh, you've got a northern dialect," and usually that means I say things like, you know, what do you call the small piece of bread? Like, you know, is it a cob or a bottom muffin? But I think for other languages, we don't really mean that. It's a much bigger difference, isn't it?
Definitely, definitely. It can be change of words. It can be change of sometimes sentence structures as well
Yeah,
with languages.
absolutely. So I'm always, my ears kind of prick up when I hear someone say we speak a different accent or dialect or even slang, because I'm thinking you probably speak something very different to what's written on the referral pad.
And it can be used to the families as well. I know my children speak Gujarati, but they actually mix Gujarati with English words.
Yeah.
So for an example, a word like sleep is suija. They'll be like, we're going suijawing. So they'll kind of make their own language up between the two.
And that's perfectly normal, isn't it? Code switching is really, really kind of appropriate for bilingual to bilingual communication.
Yeah, it just shows the maturity of the system that they're able to swap in between, which is really good.
Absolutely. So just to recap, in terms of cultural diversity, families may or may not be bilingual, and you'll find families in different situations. So there might be families that have just come to the country who are mainly speaking home language and have a very small amount of English, right through to third, fourth, fifth generation families who are culturally identifying with a different culture than the mainstream white British culture, but definitely see themselves as British first, and then another culture adds to that richness of their family.
Yes.
So cultural differences are just as important in understanding the way people might respond to healthcare. And I kind of say, you know, religion, you know, we kind of take, I think a good example recently has been kind of Christmas. Everyone's kind of celebrates Christmas no matter what religion you're from. And I think it's just become a general thing. And I live in the north, so I see, Diwali and Eid as also part of my cultural kind of community as well.
And I think it really has something in common. And they turned around my boys and said, at the end of the day, they're all the same, Mummy. They're the Festival of Lights. We're all celebrating festivals of being together as a family and eating lots of food. So it kind of really transpires across all these different festivals, that unique theme.
That's lovely, isn't it? And I think that's it. You know, when you meet young people, children and young people who have always lived in this situation, it's completely normal. And it's people who maybe are kind of more familiar with a kind of monoculture that are more unusual these days.
Yes.
So to be effective, we need to really learn about someone's religion, their family structure, their food, their way of life, what their week looks like, and be able to kind of adapt our practice to that. So I think one of the things I often say is that I am professionally nosy, and my students say, "Why did you spend so long finding out about what that family does?" What do you think about that, Sunita?
Well, I think it's important because every family is so unique. You know, we look at things like religion, way of life, and food. Myself, I'm Hindu, and traditionally Hindu people wouldn't eat beef, but my husband eats beef. So it's difficult to kind of put everyone into kind of categories that this is a way of life of a Hindu person or a Sikh person or a Muslim person, and this is the language and this is a use. Now, if you don't find out about what they might play with, what their interests are, what their hobbies are, these are all great pieces of information that you can integrate into therapy because you know that they've got an interest and can be motivated during intervention as well.
I think that's a wonderful way of saying don't stereotype. I remember meeting a white monolingual English family, and actually in terms of eating implements, the mum said, well, we're vegetarian, so we mainly with our fingers, really, to be honest. So we won't really recognise the knife, really, because we don't use it very much.
No.
So, yeah, I think it's a really good thing to kind of say cultural knowledge is a bit of a starting point to kind of start that conversation.
Definitely, and just be very inquisitive. I think they'd rather that you ask them than you judge what you think that might be.
Absolutely.